All right, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Cartoon Conference here on the channel. I'm going to sort of consider this one to be the finale for season one because obviously I probably have a lot more cartoons I'd like to talk about, but I obviously don't have the time to. So maybe like whenever I'm home again next break, like I could probably start it up again, like get a lot more out because this was something I really actually thought about kind of last minute. But again, here it is. This is the final episode that I'm going to be doing for a while, and it is for Spider-Man, the animated series. And yes, I know you may be thinking, like, oh, well, which one? There's a bunch of them. And yeah, there are. No, it's not the most recent one on Disney XD. No, it's not the earliest one with the pointing meme. Like, no, this is from 1994 to 1998. This show was probably honestly my first exposure to superheroes in general, and probably why I have such a soft spot in my heart for Spider-Man. Because nowadays, like, yeah, I have branched out a bit more. I do like a good amount of things Marvel related, and yeah, I have seen a tiny bit of DC before. Like, I watched some of Young Justice, Teen Titans, Batman: The Brave and the Bold. But you know what? I'm just always gonna be a Marvel person. If you like DC more, that's always fine. But I do like Marvel more. And yeah, I will also admit that I kind of am a lot more efficient knowing the movies, but I also do watch a good amount of the TV shows. And then whenever I see stuff, I feel like I always kind of try to look it up to see what that's based off of. Like, I don't really read the comics, I just don't really have the time. I'd like to, but I just don't. I'm kind of getting away from myself. This was the first really exposure I had with superheroes. And I even remember at one point, like back when I was a kid, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's related. I remember asking my mom, I was like, Mom, are there gonna be dinosaurs in heaven? Because I guess back when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I'm afraid that, because I'm like, oh, well, the dinosaurs wiped out, they're all dead, so maybe they're in heaven. And I'm like, oh man, if I go to heaven, I don't want them to attack me. And I remember saying, like, oh, well, don't worry, I'm sure that Spider Man will be there to protect me. like, I just really view him as a hero. Like, he's just such a great guy. Like, I love even some of the Spider-Man movies too. Honestly, the movies were probably also a major exposure for me as well. I remember having Spider-Man 3 on DVD, and I like a lot of the Spider-Man movies. I really love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and you know the whole stuff that's happened with Sony and Disney really sucks. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about cartoons. Like, there's just so many things that I really remember from it, and I think it's interesting how I saw it so many times when the show ended before I was even born. And like, I had to have been old enough to like not only watch it but actually be aware of the fact that I was watching it. So I think that's what's kind of interesting, is the fact that it was probably that good of a show that they continued to show it for probably at least like 6 years after it ended. So I still got to enjoy a good amount of it. And there are just so many different things that they had on there, like especially with the way the show ended. And what really sucks is that it was actually supposed to have another season, because it kind of ends with the cliffhanger of Peter losing Mary Jane, and then he gets caught up in all the different wars. And then it's like, oh, let's go find Mary Jane, but they never actually got picked up for another season. Something happened. So I think that always sucks that it didn't continue when it was supposed to. But even so, I feel like in a way, the way the show ended still feels pretty good, because I actually really do love the ending. How one of the Spider-Men that fought in the Spider Wars didn't actually have powers; he was just an actor. So then he's like, "Here, Spider-Man, let me show you someone that I think you'd really like to meet." So then he takes Spider-Man to Stan Lee, and I really love that interaction between the two of them. Like, Spider-Man taking Stan Lee to go web slinging. He's up on this high up building, and then the conversation they have between the two of them, like Stanley saying, "Wow, it's amazing to see a character that I created actually turn out to be so great." And then I love Stanley's final line, like, "How am I gonna get down? Maybe I need to wait for the Fantastic Four." That was always pretty funny. But then I love the fact that because it's an older cartoon, they get away with a lot more stuff. Like, you see the Spider-Man cartoon that's on now. Like, it's not that bad. I enjoy it, but it feels like it's a bit more. It's not more casual versus here. It feels like it's a lot more intense. I feel like it probably follows the storylines with a bit more detail, and it's not afraid to hold back. Like, I remember seeing some of this stuff and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of intense for a cartoon. And I will always remember the secret wars that they did whenever they had all the superheroes together for that. Whenever you see Spider-Man in charge of that because they're like, oh yeah, this is a test to see if you're worthy of what you need to do for the Spider Wars. And then how they had to go as far as fighting Doctor Doom with the Beyonder's powers. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And then how later on they're just like, oh yeah, Doctor Doom didn't actually, like, Doctor Doom wasn't really in control. It was just the Beyonder just toying with him. But then like all the things going on, like them fighting Red Skull, and then Alistair Smythe being like, yeah, I think I want to switch sides. And then them trying to get the Scorpion, or not the Scorpion, stupid me, the Lizard on their side. And then just all the people that they have to fight, and then like all the heroes that he has on their side, and then the Spider Wars, seeing like all the different versions. Like you have the Spider-Man that's basically Tony Stark, like he has this metal suit, he's a billionaire, he's famous. You have the one that took Doc Ock's power, what, that took Doc Ock's tentacles, I mean. You have the one that was going through the man spider disease, like just a bunch of different Spider-Men going on there. And then the fact that they brought back the Carnage symbiote, so then you have Spider Carnage. Every time I see that, I always still get kind of scared. Like, I'm not as scared when it's Cletus Cassidy as Carnage, but seeing Spider Carnage, that always has me kind of creeped out, because it's like part costume, and it's like you just randomly see the mouth sticking out, and I'm like, ugh, that's just creepy. I mean, it's still really cool, though, especially the way that that ends, how it turns out that in that reality that they were in at the time, Uncle Ben was still alive. So Peter is saying that Spider Carnage was going through a lot of pain, and that he's forgotten who he is, and that there's only one person that could bring him back. So then he goes and finds Uncle Ben, and then he has him talk to Spider Carnage, and that's what allows him to break through it. But then also I just remembered the reason that Spider Carnage was around was because they also did the whole idea of cloning. Like they brought in that arc as well, which I thought was really cool. They brought in the whole Ben Reilly part as well. And then I love the stuff that they did with Venom and Carnage. Like I remember whenever they first introduced Venom in the show, like not Spider-Man's costume, but when it actually bonded with Eddie Brock, I was like, oh man, this is actually kind of scary, because it's like, here you have Venom, he has all Spider-Man's powers, he's a lot bigger and stronger, and he can't set off his spider sense, so it's like you never know when he's going to show up. Like that always had me kind of spooked. And I think that's also why Venom is probably one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, just because of that effect that he has on me, just watching in so many different versions. And then Carnage, here it is, yeah, like he has all these random ass powers too. Then he's with Cletus Cassidy, who just doesn't care. He's just insane. That's why he's like a perfect bond with the symbiote. Which, by the way, I can't wait to see the new Venom movie whenever that comes around. That should be pretty good. And then I love like some of the smaller things that they do with it, like the Green Goblin. I guess that's not a small thing. That's probably pretty decent. He's a pretty iconic villain. But then how they have the Hobgoblin there as well. And then how they did Michael Morbius, like they brought in Blade so they could do the vampire stuff. And then how Wilson Fisk was a major component of so much of what was going on. And then I like the idea of how they bring in Felicia Hardy as Black Cat. They kind of hint at the idea that the two of them have a relationship every now and then. Like, there's just so many good things about it. I just love the fact that it's so detailed compared to other stuff that happens now. Like, I can't really think of too many superhero cartoons that I don't like, but I like the fact that this one does have so much more detail. And then you have, like, one of the most iconic moments ever. Like, so many people identify it as overacting at its finest. The scene where Spider-Man with his symbiote suit is chasing after Shocker, and he's just like yelling super far. He's like, "I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!" Like, that moment's always hilarious. I'm just laughing my ass off every time I see that. And then I like the idea of how Peter kind of changed his personality with the symbiote, because it's like, oh yeah, here it is, I'm unstoppable. And it's like, oh yeah, this thing isn't good for me. I'm trying to think of more story arcs that they have. I really like the stuff that they did with Red Skull and Hydra and then Electro. Like, just whenever they have like the other villains that come in, I always thought that Scorpion kind of stood out to me a lot. Probably because he's this bright green guy. And then I forgot how he actually started off. So whenever, I think it was about a year or two ago, I went back and watched the series all the way through. And then whenever it turns out that J. Jonah Jameson hired him to try to take out the Spider-Man, because they're like, oh, the Scorpion is the Spider's natural predator, so... And then you have Matt Gargan, he's just like this slob, like, he doesn't have that much going for him. And it's like, he becomes the Scorpion, but he can't change back. So it's like, interesting. So, kind of new respect for that. And then, what was the name? Vulture. I really like the way that they handle Vulture in that show, too. It's really interesting seeing how he goes around, and then seeing how at some point Scorpion and Vulture actually kind of like stay together because they're like, hey, maybe we could help each other out. And then how you see Scorpion tries to go straight, like he tries to do better. Like just all the detailed things that they have there. Like it just does so much more than some of the other cartoons. Here, you know what? Like let me pull up some of the episodes that they have on my phone here. Like let me see a list of some of these things because I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's see. So yeah, they start off with the lizard. They do the spider slayers, which I thought was really cool. Dr. Octopus. I always thought that Dr. Octopus was interesting in that show. So I find it interesting how in Ultimate Spider-Man for so long, like they kind of have just look like this creepy guy, like super long hair. He has to use his tentacles to walk around, kind of fat. But then like at the very end, they made Doc Ock look a lot more like how he does in this show. It's like he stands upright. He kind of has a bit of a bowl cut. He speaks with like this German accent. I always thought it was interesting seeing him. Plus, I always also remember having DVDs every now and then for this show. Like when we would go to, believe it or not, Blockbuster, we would get DVDs for this show sometimes. And then I remember seeing him on that. So, who else we got here? Mysterio. Didn't really have as much experience seeing Mysterio, but that was still really cool. Craven. I thought it was interesting how they had Craven in here as well. And then they did the stuff with the symbiote. The chameleon. The chameleon always stood out to me a bit because I always thought it was interesting how it's like, oh, out of nowhere, he could just be some other dude and you don't know. Neogenic Nightmare. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one I was talking about whenever he was going through the man spider disease. I thought that was interesting how that stood out, where you see now his powers are kind of backlashing. So he goes from, like, he literally does become a menace. Like, J. Jonah Jameson's kind of onto something. And then the stuff they did with Michael Morbius, I don't know why. Like, Morbius was that guy that I just loved to hate. Like, he didn't actually do anything wrong. I just thought he was kind of a douche. So, I don't know. I'm kind of But then it's like the fact that you see later on he kind of reforms himself. Yeah, they did the whole... Oh, wow. The Neogenic Nightmare was like the whole season. Wow. Okay, so let's see. Sins of the Fathers. Yeah, that was the whole season as well. This was the stuff where, like, I think this was the stuff where it's like Wilson Fisk was like really stepping up. Like, they were doing the stuff trying to get rid of him. Oh, yeah, and that's whenever then Venom and Carnage come in. Actually, I think they were working for Dormammu. That's what really kind of stood out. I think that's who that was. Here, let me see, because I want to make sure. Let's see here. Let's talk about Carnage. They had War Machine in this episode. Baron Mordo, that was one of... Oh, yeah, it was probably Dormammu that they were working for then, since Baron Mordo was involved. Let's see, Season 4. That was whenever he starts spending a lot of time teaming up with Black Cat. And then that's whenever they started to fight the vampires a bit more often. And then the Green Goblin came in. That's when Mary Jane returned. And then it turns out that Mary Jane was a clone. I'm like, wow, that just kind of hit me. In that final fight where he's fighting against Hydro Man. And out of nowhere, Mary Jane has these powers too. And then she realized that she's a clone. And then that's when it kind of starts up the whole thing later on. Where, like, they're leading into the whole stuff going on that eventually caused the Spider Wars. The fact that, like, it's all connected, like, there is that continuity. Again, I just really love the show. I feel like it definitely covers a lot more stuff. It's a lot more intense. I feel like it's because it's a bit older, so you could get away with a lot more stuff back then. Because it feels like stuff you see now, it feels like it's so lighthearted. Stuff you'd see maybe 10 years ago, it's kind of in between. But here you have, like, this is over 20 years old. So it really goes into a lot more detail. It gets a lot more intense. And I feel like it's so much... it's very enjoyable to watch. It's a shame that it never got another season. I think that If they at least had that one more season, they could have properly tried to wrap things up. But oh well, I guess we'll move on with life. I mean, we've had 20 years to move on. So yeah, that wraps up the finale of Cartoon Conference Season 1. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I have. I knew that before I went back to school, I really wanted to just sit down and talk about cartoons because I love cartoons. I love watching them. I love being able to talk about them. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you new. You can see other videos. I'll see you guys in the far future. So, yeah, bye.